a few years ago, I started realizing like even networks, while they are good, they are not like the be all end all to fix loneliness. And so like my kind of my the word I use now is like, even when I'm in a network with guys or whatever, is how important it is that they're known. I just use that word being known. Like who knows you and who do you know? And so that's the thing that I'm pushing to guys. I'm like, even if you don't come to a network, even if you don't come to my thing, it's like when you're a youth pastor, you're constantly trying to get students or parents to come to your thing. I feel like my role now, I'm constantly trying to get people to come to my thing. I don't care if you come to my thing, but are you known? And then I realized, am I known? Like, am I that guy who in ministry, I'm constantly preaching community and I'm not in community? And so a few years ago, I was really convicted of that. And so, even this morning, met with one of my guys I meet with weekly. And I mean, we know each other on a deep level. I mean, and it's more than accountability. We know our marriages, our kids, our inner lives. And that's what I feel like there's a temptation in ministry to hold people at arm's length.
Yeah,
because we're so worried if we don't, we're going to lose our job. I can't truly be known.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever this finds you, wherever you are. Thanks for making this podcast today a part of your day. Jumping in here to episode 137 of the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, talking about a really, really important issue, maybe a topic that often kind of lurks in the shadows of youth ministry, and that is the topic of loneliness. It's a struggle I think that many, many, many youth pastors face, yet very few, I think, actually talk about it. So if you've ever felt isolated or overwhelmed, you're not alone in that for sure. So in this episode, we're going to kind of uncover some of the reasons behind that loneliness. We'll talk about why it's such a significant issue. And most importantly, we're going to give you some practical, scalable, actionable steps, no matter where you are, whatever the context of your ministry is, to kind of help you reconnect with others and thrive there in your ministry where you are. And so really excited to jump in today, hear from my good friend, Zach Wyatt, who aside from being a phenomenal guy when it comes to student ministry and an incredible mentor of many, is also a Tennessee fan, which is a big deal for me. And so grateful to have him on the show today. I know you're going to get a ton out of it. If you're not already subscribed to the show, please make sure you do that wherever you listen. To subscribe or follow, please jump into the Facebook group over the Longer Haul Facebook group over on Facebook. And of course, make sure you're on the mailing list there at thelongerhaul.com. You can also check out a ton of other resources there for you at thelongerhaul.com. So big episode today. I don't want to get in the way of too much of it because I think it's a really important topic to jump into. So with all that said and all that out of the way, here is today's episode and today's interview with Zach Wyatt. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show today. Thanks for tuning in and listening wherever this finds you, wherever you are. Thanks for making this podcast today a part of your day. Jumping in here to episode 137 of the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, talking about a really, really important issue, maybe a topic that often kind of lurks in the shadows of youth ministry, and that is the topic of loneliness. It's a struggle I think that many, many, many youth pastors face, yet very few, I think, actually talk about it. So if you've ever felt isolated or overwhelmed, you're not alone in that for sure. So in this episode, we're going to kind of uncover some of the reasons behind that loneliness. We'll talk about why it's such a significant issue. And most importantly, we're going to give you some practical, scalable, actionable steps, no matter where you are, whatever the context of your ministry is, to kind of help you reconnect with others and thrive there in your ministry where you are. And so really excited to jump in today, hear from my good friend, Zach Wyatt, who aside from being a phenomenal guy when it comes to student ministry and an incredible mentor of many, is also a Tennessee fan, which is a big deal for me. And so grateful to have him on the show today. I know you're going to get a ton out of it. If you're not already subscribed to the show, please make sure you do that wherever you listen. To subscribe or follow, please jump into the Facebook group over the Longer Haul Facebook group over on Facebook. And of course, make sure you're on the mailing list there at thelongerhaul.com. You can also check out a ton of other resources there for you at thelongerhaul.com. So big episode today. I don't want to get in the way of too much of it because I think it's a really important topic to jump into. So with all that said and all that out of the way, here is today's episode and today's interview with Zach Wyatt.
Welcome to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast, helping you survive and thrive in youth ministry. And now, here's your host, Jody Livingston.
Hey, Zach, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you on for a lot of reasons. One, because you're a Tennessee fan. And I just think there should be more of those in the world. And so anytime I can get a Tennessee fan on the show, I'll take it. But we've kind of crossed paths over the years in a bunch of different ways. And so I'm really excited for you to come on. We kind of been talking for, probably a couple months about this. And so to kind of finally nail that down, I'm excited about. For folks who are going to be listening, who have never met you, don't know you, maybe take a minute just to introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your journey in youth ministry, how you got to where you are, what you're doing right now.
Well, yeah, first off, go Vols. And that's enough reason to be here in and of itself. But no, love that kindred piece right there. But yeah, so I serve with a ministry called Youth Leader Collective. We're based out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And I've been doing this for 8 years. My primary role is to serve youth pastors, connect, coach, and care for them in the Chattanooga and North Georgia area primarily. Before that, I served as a youth pastor in the Chattanooga area for 16 years, some of that bivocational, part-time, and full-time. And so I've lived in Chattanooga my whole life. I'm married. My wife, April, we've been married for 21 years. And we have 2 boys. We have an 18-year-old who's a freshman at UT Chattanooga. And I have a 13-year-old who's a 7th grader. And so, yeah, that's our life.
Busy life.
It is a busy life, but it's a good life. We're grateful for it.
And we have a shared friend in Tony Sauter. He's been on the show quite some time ago, talking a little bit then about the Pray For Me campaign and those things. And so that's actually kind of how we connected initially, was through Tony.
Yeah. Tony's the executive director. He's of our ministry. He was doing what I did before me. We're actually celebrating our ministry, celebrating 30 years this year. Awesome. And so for those 16 years, I was a youth pastor. He was my mentor. He was who I called. He was the one setting up the networks and just connecting me with other youth pastors. And when I needed wisdom, he was who I called. And then he established the Pray For Me campaign, which connects intergenerational relationships in churches. And that's a nationwide ministry now. So he spends most of his time moving that forward, and was what brought me on to carry this arm of the ministry forward.
Wow, that's cool. It's been a while since he's been on to talk about that, but I'll make sure to link to that episode in the show notes, as well as a link to the Pray For Me campaign. Just such a cool ministry and opportunity for so many churches. I love that. I love that. Yeah. Let me ask you this. We're going to talk about loneliness today in youth ministry. That's kind of the thrust of this. What was it that drew you to the role that you're in? Was it kind of I'm sitting here realizing I need people around me, or?
Yeah. Well, I just remember for myself, even when I was a youth pastor, I was drawn to that piece. I realized I couldn't do ministry alone, whether it was in my own setting as a youth pastor, needing volunteers around me, or just as a youth pastor realizing that there were things that I couldn't talk about in my own church setting. I couldn't talk about even with the staff, even though I had a great staff around me, and I loved my staff at times, but I couldn't even. There were other people that I just, the old C.S. Lewis quote about friendship. You too. He said, that was friendship, is when you could sit across the table and say, oh, you too. Yeah. And I needed that around me, even when I was a youth pastor. And Tony would facilitate these networks, and just sitting down at a Mexican restaurant across from somebody and talking about the joy and the pain of lock-ins, or the challenges
Listen,
of parents.
Stop.
Yeah, no.
There is no joy to a lock-in. Stop.
Yeah.
Don't even play.
I know. Both of us have the bald head and the gray beard. We both know at this point in stage there's no joy with
Yeah, that's
lock-ins
right.
anymore. Yes. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. But for that random person out there who still finds joy, but yes, it is just to be able to sit and talk about, the challenging parent, and just all those things that other people that don't walk through that resonate with me. And so when I came into this role with our ministry, Youth Leader Collective, I thought that what I would be doing is setting up networks, and maybe setting up events, setting up lunch and learns, and helping people think through strategies to find volunteers, and thinking through that. I remember my very first time I sat across the table from a youth pastor. He lamented to me about loneliness. He lamented to me about, he said, "Zach, we just had Pastor Appreciation Month, and they did something for everyone in the church. They did something even for the pianist, but they didn't do anything for me."
Yeah.
And I was like, man, and I realized how widespread, really an epidemic it is.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation I hear over and over and over.
Yeah. I mean, obviously this podcast exists because we're trying to keep youth pastors in the game, right? We will want to see them survive youth ministry, but not, I mean, and for like those days where that's all we're doing is surviving. But really, what does it look like to thrive in your role, to thrive in your calling? And I, May will be 25 years that I've been a youth pastor, which feels crazy to say. And when I look back over those 25 years, I could think of a lot of challenges, big time challenges that I would by no means minimize. But man, loneliness just creeps up over and over and over, particularly the longer I'm in ministry, right? Because, and COVID hasn't helped to this. I look around, the people that I knew in ministry, there's fewer and fewer of them in ministry. And so now all of a sudden, even the people that I did have that were like, hey, I could call or I could talk to, it's not that I still can't, it's just not the same anymore, because they're not necessarily walking through some of those same challenges to the level that I am. And so just think my conversations are similar to yours. Every time I talk to a youth pastor, it feels like at some point when they get honest, loneliness comes to the surface. And I just think it's a reason that so many are walking away.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about all of the expectations that are on anyone in ministry, but I think youth ministry has its own set of unique challenges. We live in an expert culture. I hire my kids batting lessons. My dad, he would take me to the park when I was a kid to teach me batting lessons, and not that there's anything wrong with taking your kids to an expert to get batting lessons or softball hitting lessons or whatever it is. But we live in an expert culture. Teach our kid how to play violin. We take them to learn how to play the violin. Whatever it is, and then it transfers even in the church. And the parent doesn't know what to do, how to disciple their kid, and so you're the discipleship expert. Yep. And so we have that pressure of that, and then everyone has a different level of expectation on us. And oftentimes, youth pastors are hired in churches to say, "Hey, look, we don't have any young families. Fix it." And so there's that expectation as well, and then they don't have any community around them in their church. So there's just lots of layers of things that add up to why there's no community for the youth pastor.
Yeah, and so what I'd love to do today in our time together is just kind of talk through some ways to combat that. Like, what are some real practical action steps for the youth pastor, youth minister listening, who's sitting here going, man, I downloaded this episode today because I am desperately lonely, and I don't know where to start. What are some things that I can practically do so that I don't just walk away. Because it's hard. Like, I wasn't as lonely when I was bivocational.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't ever a thing that I felt. But when I became a full-time youth pastor, it was almost immediate.
Mm-hmm.
There were seasons, and I remember it catching me by surprise.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like I said, it hasn't gotten easier necessarily as I've gotten older now. There's more people I know, but in terms of being able to sit down, like you're saying, across the table and, hey, here's what's going on in my life. It's something I have to be really intentional for, to combat. And so what would you say, like, if you were sitting across from a youth pastor who's listening, or, and they said, man, Zach, I'm just dying. I'm just so lonely. And, I'm not necessarily in the Chattanooga area.
Yeah.
Like to come join you for one of your groups, but I just don't even know where to start.
Well, if you're in an area, I would find out, if you could, is there something already going on? How do you find that out? Do you have a local denominational association of some sort that you can reach out to? There's certain questions, I've heard someone use the phrase gatekeeper. Who are the gatekeepers in your town? Is it if you're in the Baptist world, who's the director of missions? They say, hey, is there already a group of youth pastors that get together weekly for breakfast or monthly for lunch? Just to find out is there something already taking place? Don't be afraid to reach out to another youth pastor in town to ask if something else is going on. If you're new in town, start slow.
Yeah.
I was working with a youth pastor who was in our area. He moved to another area of town, and he was very much gung-ho about getting a network going. Well, he's the young guy in town. He's 24, and he's calling all these 40 and 45-year-olds going, I'm starting a network. Well, what are they? They're going to be very much, they're going to hold him at arm's length, like, hey, young buck, hey, we're excited. But, there's people, Tony has this saying, people do things with people they know and trust.
Yeah.
And so you got to take things slow. And so my encouragement to anyone, if you're new in an area or if you just don't have relationships with someone, is start slow and ask one guy out for coffee.
Yeah.
Ask one guy out for lunch or breakfast and say, hey, I just want to get to know you. And then ask, what can I do for you? Mm-hmm. Because there's also, I'm sure we've never heard about this ever happening, but territorialism happens in ministry.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people have this fear of one ministry wanting to get to know another. Like, what is it they want from me?
Yep.
And in certain areas, it's going to be harder than others. And so is this person trying to do something with my students? What are they trying to do? Letting someone know I want something for you, not from you. And so just slowly building a relationship. So I would say, starting slow, just to take someone out for coffee, and then from that too, even reaching out further.
Yeah, I love that. One of the questions that I have learned to ask over the years when I'm meeting someone new, so if I'm having that coffee or that lunch, I always say, hey, who's someone you know that I should know?
That's a good question.
Because I find that people know people, right? And if I'm new, especially, I don't know people. And so, having that coffee or that lunch, is, hey, who do you know that I need to know? And could you connect me with them? I'd love to have a similar lunch with them or similar coffee with them. Has been really helpful for me, because then there's some overlap. I'm not just calling random churches. I'm kind of very informally building some community among people who already know each other.
Yeah.
Then it becomes a little easier for me to say, hey, what if we all went? Or what if we all came? And so I love to, you bring up new. I'm sure we both know Matt Lawson. He's a longtime friend of mine. Love that guy. And one of the things, Matt was church planting here in Burbank, which is not easy. But he was crushing it. And I remember talking to Matt, And he said, you only get one shot to be the new guy.
Mm.
And so he would say, leverage that. And not in the sense of like aggressively, but you only get one chance to call and say, hey, I'm the new youth pastor at blank church. I'd love to grab coffee. It's a little harder to do when you've been there for 8 years and you've never reached out. Doesn't mean you can't or you shouldn't. But when you are new, even if you're new to a role, it's easy to use that as an excuse, right?
Yeah.
So especially if you're listening and you're new to your role or new to your area, use that new piece as a reason to call. But if you're not new, that doesn't mean you shouldn't. You should still call for sure.
Yeah, that's good. And you said something there, and you didn't use this word, but it oozes this, and it's humility. It's like whatever approach you take, whether you're new or you've been there 8 years, is taking that approach of humility of, okay, so I'm here to learn. I'm here to gain wisdom from you. And it made me think even about the guy who, I think about your setting, Jody. I so appreciate your approach to this. You're going to be at a larger church. You're going to be at a lot of times guys at the larger churches will think, well, networking is for the guy down the street, and they'll think this is for them. And Tony, he always said another saying. He's like, networking is nobody is a part of a network nobody wants to be a part of a network until they think they need one. And a lot of times guys at larger churches, they think, well, I don't need that. I've got a team. And so what I encourage the guys at, say, at some of our larger churches is like, okay, so you might have a great team or whatever, but the rest of the people in our network, they look to you and they say, hey man, you guys are the big church in town. You could really benefit these guys. So I encourage them, hey, don't hesitate to reach out. Like, you initiate, you be intentional, you humble yourself and kind of initiate those things as well, which I know you do so well already.
Yeah, I think I tell our team all the time, like we exist obviously to reach students here, and we want to minister to those that God brings to us. And in the desert here, we're trying to reach teens across the desert. We're not the only ones. Our church in general takes a really the posture of we want to be a blessing to many in other churches as well, and try to help and resource where we can. So it's a little easier. I don't serve on a staff that's very territorial. Now, what's interesting is almost everyone that I meet, every other youth pastor I meet with, and our team meets with, all say the same thing. They all say, you're not what I thought you'd be. Right. And so we're always fighting this perception that we're like this, kind of closed off, even though I don't know, there's not many more things I think we could do to like try to help and support others. But it does take intentionality on our part as a larger church to do that. To be fair, when I was in a much smaller context, it was the same. I mean, I was the small guy. I felt like I didn't have anything to offer to a network. Now I get 10 kids in my youth group. I'm going to go over here and network with guys that are, they've got 30, 40 kids. Like, what am I bringing to that conversation? And so regardless of where you are on that end, it's not the size of your ministry that dictates your need for a network. It's the role that you're in and your need for community and encouragement around. And I think sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget that, it's like, we measure everything by the size and scale of our ministry. The size and scale of your ministry isn't going to matter if you leave. If you burn out, if you walk away, it will all be for nothing. Yeah. So we got to put people around you.
No, that's good. One thing I've appreciated about what you've done at Longer Haul, and I know something Chris has always done, you guys have always really helped guys think through when they're going through an interview process. Yeah. And this is one of the questions I talk about when I'm talking to guys that are walking through the process is make this a question you ask the team. You're obviously, you're not just being interviewed, you're interviewing a church. Ask them, is networking something your church is a part of? Like, is this encouraged that this is part of the culture here? And because I've seen guys go into churches where there's such that territorialism mindset that the pastor or the other leadership are not part of that culture, and it ends up hindering them as they try to reach out and network with others.
Yeah. I would say, as a word of warning, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, don't network so that you can do events together.
Yes.
You might do events together. Maybe that happens. But that is not the purpose for that. And I can't tell you the number of times I've been invited to join a network because they wanted to do a Disciple Now weekend together, or because they wanted to do camp together. And it's like, man, I just need somebody to talk to. I just want to encourage other people. I want to be encouraged when we need it. What about this, as I'm thinking about that? You mentioned sometimes you can't share everything with your staff, your fellow staff, and you need some folks. What about some wisdom in terms of what you do share, don't share with a network, especially if it's local to you? Are there guidelines that you'd give? Like, is there, should we be reserved about some things? Is there, where does that fall?
Yeah. So, obviously, you're getting into a really great part there. I mean, even like what you said about the event thing, like I tell when I'm painting a picture with a new person in town, hey, really love you to come to one of our networks. I tell them that, we don't, this isn't about coming together and planning an event or anything like that. I tell that it's very much about us sharing life and sharing about what's going on in ministry. I tell them that what I usually do is I might send out an article or some questions to create some conversation around ministry or leadership, but it's very much just an organic type thing. And then we pray together and encourage one another. I really try to, and I learned this from Tony, try to protect our time. I remember one of the first things that someone asked me to do, and they were very well-meaning, is they worked for a ministry, and they said, hey, I'd love to buy lunch, and I'd love to sell I'd love to basically make a pitch. And we don't allow anything like that at our networks, because I want the youth pastors to feel like, hey, this is a safe place for us to be able to just come and be ourselves. And then back to your question, I don't allow the networks to get to a place where it's kind of like dump on the pastor or dump on certain things. And it's, our cultures have come to the place where they realize it's not that. Yes, people can share. It's a safe place, but it's not dump on time. And if we need to have a one-on-one conversation where someone's having a hard time, then we can do that, but it's not, let's just come and dump. And so I think trying to guide the conversation where it's not that. And that's part of why I'll send out an article to kind of direct the conversation or send out questions. And I think it helps guide that as well. I'm the kind of person, and some people are just natural leaders and facilitators. I have to plan things out. And that's just me. And I think you have to have a facilitator. This is I think you have to have someone. Some people are just going to be able to come together, and that's great. I have to facilitate. I have to plan out, some conversation, whether it's questions or an article. And even if it's an article, I have to plan some questions around it. And then God may take it in a totally different direction, which is great, but that's how I do it.
Yeah, that's good. I've heard story. The reason I asked that is I've heard stories, right, of something was shared at a network. That person went back and said, man, you'll never guess what they said about the pastor over there. Well, that pastor knows their pastor. And all of a sudden now you're in the office like, what's going on? Like this isn't so I just think being wise is what I'll say.
That's a great point too.
Wise about what you're saying, because you need to be able to have people to share with, but you also need to be mindful that, not everything should be shared with everybody either. So, and I think you find some of those people that you can really share with over time. But again, that takes some time.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's in a sense, it's like how we define our certain community settings at church. I mean, is this a closed group? Is this an open group? Well, our networks are open groups. And so we have
Yep.
some people that they come once every few months, and then we have some people that are faithful every month. And so it's going to create a different dynamic.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about networks, and I love that. I think that's super helpful. If you're not in an area that has one, I think we've talked a little bit of maybe what that looks like to begin one. What if you're in an area where you're in a pretty rural area, you look around and you go, man, the nearest youth pastor's 45 minutes away.
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Yeah. Sometimes we have to look outside the church. I know a friend who's moved outside of Chattanooga and tried to start a network, and he just realized I'm the only full-time guy in the association. He's an SBC guy, and he said that, and of course our ministry works across denominations, and so, but he said even in his entire county, he's the only, and he said, I'd have to travel an hour or so to get to the next full time. What does that look like? And so I said, what does it look like to find community? And we haven't even gotten into the conversation of, and this is, I'm going to this because this is where I got talking to him. We haven't even gotten into spouses yet. I mean, there's a community issue for loneliness, not just impacts youth pastors. It impacts is, if the youth pastor's lonely, their spouse is too.
100%.
Typically. And so what I encouraged was for him and his spouse what does it look like for them to look outside of the church, whether it was finding community in finding another Bible study in another church even. Now that doesn't mean that they're not seeking out, being members of their church, but even finding another Bible study in another church or starting something. That was my wisdom to him. That was unique to him. Yeah.
No, I love that. I think back, there was a season where I was in a context where we had Sunday morning, Sunday school, 11 a.m. worship, Sunday night youth, Wednesday night youth. And every time there was something happening that I could have benefited from as just a believer, I was leading. I wasn't able to be a part of a small group or, anything like that because I was always in charge at that time. And so we had to find ways to surround ourselves with people that meant we weren't going to be in that. Right. And honestly, for me, when I look back and think about that, a lot of those relationships came from our volunteers.
Yeah.
And it wasn't to the same level, right? Like there's things as a youth pastor I'm not sharing with my volunteers for sure. But that's who we did life with 3-4 days a week, Yep. And so that was kind of the easiest place for us to start. I also think I made the mistake early on, and it's probably because I was given really crappy advice that I couldn't have friends in the church. And so I was always really hesitant to make friends in the church as I was on staff at the church. And I can understand to a degree why people feel that way and think that way. But if I have a regret 25 years in, it's that there were people that I would have been able to forge closer and deeper friendships with that I just didn't allow myself to because I was afraid of whatever, might come, or hurt or distrust or betrayal. And I think that comes with any friendship, but stakes are a little higher for sure. You think you have to be mindful, why is this person wanting to be my friend? But I just wish I had been more intentional there over the years to lean into some of those relationships.
That's good. I think even on a personal level, my last church, I served there for 10 years. Some of my closest relationships were with volunteers. I had relationships outside the church, but my closest relationships, my closest friends were people who became who started out as volunteers there. And that was my community within the church. And so, that's a great point. Absolutely.
Okay. What about gosh, I hesitate to even ask and bring this up.
Mm.
What about online communities? Like Facebook groups or things like that.
Those Facebook groups.
Those Facebook groups. Not all are created equal. I will say I work really hard to guard and protect the Longer Haul Facebook group.
Yes.
It doesn't go quite as crazy as others do. But what are your thoughts there in terms of community and...
Yeah. I think for a lot of, we obviously know what they can devolve into. But I think that they have been very helpful for some people. Obviously, they're not they're not perfect. I mean, they're not going to, they're not perfect community. But I think for a lot of leaders out there, a lot of volunteer, part-time, bivocational leaders especially, who don't have access to a lot of resources or just even to just people to reach out to, it's probably been very helpful. And I'm grateful for that technology to be able to have that. And just to be able to, it's constantly up in my feed and just seeing people and, the algorithms are going to shoot the most polarizing stuff up to the top, but but there's a lot of people that are engaging very positively with it. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I will say I've seen some of the worst advice I've ever given in a youth ministry Facebook group, more than one. There's so many times I'm like, and I don't, do you comment? Do you just? I think I'll just leave that one be because everybody seems to be running in the same direction over the cliff. Yeah. But I do think too, and I think of, I even think of the Longer Haul group. I think that it's been helpful and encouraging. I think there's value to your point, and so I think there's a place to start. I think, one of the things, I'll play my cards a little bit here. One of the things that I've really been thinking through this last year is how do I provide and continue to create a space of genuine community for Longer Haul folks. A Facebook group's great, but it's still there. What is, you're limited on even what kind of you're able to do or what that looks like. And so just things I'm thinking through because of the conversation we're having today. I just keep finding youth pastors that are just incredibly lonely. And, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way.
No.
So
it does not. I'm so glad we're talking about this, Jody. Like this whole issue is what drives what I do. I mean, I love doing events. I love doing things, but a few years ago, I started realizing even networks, while they are good, they are not the be all end all to fix loneliness. And so the word I use now is even when I'm in a network with guys or whatever, is how important it is that they're known. I just use that word, being known, who knows you and who do you know? And so that's the thing that I'm pushing to guys. I'm like, even if you don't come to a network, even if you don't come to my thing, it's like when you're a youth pastor, you're constantly trying to get students or parents to come to your thing. I feel like my role now, I'm constantly trying to get people to come to my thing. I don't care if you come to my thing, but are you known? And then I realized, am I known? Am I that guy who in ministry, I'm constantly preaching community and I'm not in community? And so a few years ago, I was really convicted of that. And so, even this morning, met with one of my guys I meet with weekly. And we know each other on a deep level. And it's more than accountability. We know our marriages, our kids, our inner lives. And that's what I feel like there's a temptation in ministry to hold people at arm's length. Yeah. Because we're so worried if we don't, we're going to lose our job. I can't truly be known. And that is the thing that, I've learned to be more vulnerable with guys. I've learned to be more real with guys because I don't think I think we've created all these other spaces outside of our church, outside of churches, whether it be places like Celebrate Recovery or places like I don't know, just places outside of our church where people are being real and people are being honest, and but guys inside our churches don't feel like they can be honest and real, and so that's just been the heartbeat of my ministry. Anyways, I just wanted to share that.
No, I love that.
And I really want youth pastors to feel like they can be known, and that's the heartbeat of our ministry.
You mentioned a minute ago, which I'd love to dive in a little bit here,
Mm-hmm.
spouses. You mentioned wives.
Yeah.
I think I know how much my wife has struggled with loneliness over time, but I also know that there are women in ministry who have husbands who I can't imagine how lonely that would be in the sense of trying, like our church has been great here for my wife. The staff wives kind of do things together at times.
That's good.
However, like we've got a couple of ladies on staff, but their husbands aren't coming to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So I would say maybe in a broader sense in terms of spouses, what are some things that come to mind in terms of helping and guarding the heart of the spouse in terms of loneliness?
I think it's kind of twofold. And in one sense, I mean, you got the fact that, so you got like just a lack of community for the same reasons that the youth pastor is struggling with lack of community. But then you could also have a lack of community because the youth pastor may be like not prioritizing their time. Like, it's like, I mean, I only say that because I've been there.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We've all been there, right? We've all been there.
That, I've had those hard conversations with my wife, and it's just, so then loneliness on top of isolation and loneliness even more. And so it's really hard. And so, the youth pastor has to be very intentional of not only seeking out community for themselves, but seeking them out for their spouse as well.
Yeah.
Of what does that look like? And I know within our network, there's a group of guys who again, they start to come around and do events, but there's a group of about 4 guys. They do D-Nows together. They do summer stuff together. Well, now their spouses are starting to get together and do stuff.
That's cool. That's cool.
It's been so encouraging. I mean, going over for dinner and doing things and going out and going to the park with their kids. I mean, things like that, and all organic. I mean, I've played no part in any of it. It's just but they've seen the need. And so I think it's just a matter of the youth pastor being intentional to say, okay, I've got to help foster this.
Yeah. And I think for me, I've had to kind of encourage my wife to seek out some of that. And sometimes I kind of facilitate that, right? If I'm, instead of meeting for coffee, I'm inviting them over. And then we're kind of hanging out, or we're going to go to dinner instead of coffee, and my wife's going to come with me. We're going to figure out childcare. When our kids were young, I usually had a student watching, babysitting or something, and then we would go out and grab dinner together with another couple in ministry or a volunteer couple that we're, kind of leaning into and wanting to get to know better. I think in the seasons that we've done ministry together well, we've probably had an easier time dealing with loneliness than when I'm kind of running towards ministry and she's not as much. And I know that's a whole nother conversation in terms of what level your spouse is involved in your ministry, and different churches have different expectations. I can just say that for us, and we were dating when I was a youth pastor, got married after. So our entire ministry, we've been doing it together, and it's looked different in different places, in different stops, in different seasons. Like our kids were small. She was not as involved, engaged, as our kids got older, she was a little more, when we didn't have kids, she was all in, best volunteer, right?
Yeah.
But I think in those seasons where we've done it well together, it's been easier to fight against some of that loneliness, because then all of a sudden when we're not, it's not even that we're lonely because we don't necessarily have friends around us. We also feel very isolated in our ministry context. And man, I just think isolation and loneliness is a disaster for somebody in ministry. What an opportunity for sin to creep in and you just to destroy it all, because again, you just didn't build a good community around you. You've worked so hard to create community for the students you serve. You've probably worked really hard to create community for the volunteers that you lead. And in the midst of that, you neglected your own community. And all of it will be for nothing if you're not careful.
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I use this idea of being known, because you know this, whether we're talking about you or the youth pastor or our spouse, we can be around people all the time.
Oh, 100%.
But if we're not, whether we use the word community or we use the word being known, unless we have that, I've experienced it where I'm around people all the time, but I'm not known. I'm hidden. My heart is hidden, and I'm isolating. And, it's like, I remember, I'm going to go on a soapbox here because it lives just at the surface for me. Like Tim Keller preached this message one time called 3 Dangers for Anyone in Ministry. And I don't remember the second and third one, but I remember the first one. I listened to like 6-7 years ago. But the first one, he said, you can be operating in your gifts, whatever your gifts are. Let's say you're a gifted evangelist and people are coming to know Christ. Let's say you're a gifted teacher and people are growing in their word. But whatever your gift is, but you could have hidden sin, and people don't know what it is, and you're not you're not dealing with it. But because you're operating your gifts, things are still happening, and good things are happening. And because of that, you're numb. You become numb to what's happening inside of you, whether it's greed or lust or whatever, pride, but these good things are happening in the ministry. And he called it just a danger for anyone in ministry. And that's why it's so important for us in ministry to be known. Yeah. But we can be around people and think things are okay. And if we're not known, man, it's such a danger. Yeah. And the same thing goes for our spouse.
100%. When was the last time, and maybe it's different in your context, but think back to when you were a youth pastor.
Yeah.
When was the last time you could remember serving on staff and someone asking you directly how your walk with the Lord was?
Yeah. Only because of mentors in my life.
Yeah.
Matt Brinkley and Tony Souter both.
Yeah.
That was a regular part of them. Matt Brinkley leads a ministry and he called Pact, and that's part of what he would do in my life. And every time I was with him, which would be once a quarter or so, he would ask me 2 questions that no one else on my staff, no one ever asked me these questions. How's your walk with Jesus?
Yep.
And how's your time with your family?
Yeah. Yep.
And those 2 things have stuck with me so much, because usually when people ask me how I'm doing, they mean, how many kids did you have at youth group? How many kids are going to camp? Did you clean the van? Those things. And they're not really asking about your heart like that. So I really love that question.
Yeah, no. And I can't think back to anyone, like in my church context, prior to here. I will say that has not been the case here, where someone on staff, particularly maybe a supervisor or somebody, a pastor, somebody asked me directly how my walk was and how my family was doing, other than just a casual, hey, how are your kids, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that's crazy, right? Like and part of me wonders if we don't ask because we're afraid of the answer. Because what if you said, man, I'm not good, I'm not good. What do they do? And I will say this, for all of that, let me say this. There was a time not where I am, at a previous church where I went to my senior pastor and our church leadership and said, I'm struggling. I am burned out right now, and I am not sure what to do. And the response was, well, if you're burned out, maybe you need a change of scenery. Now, that's not the response I needed in that moment, right? Like, and I didn't leave and go somewhere else because of that.
Right.
But I was like, man, I'm crying out for some help from the only person who can actually help me in terms of my job here. And you just want me to keep going.
Yep.
Like, okay. And so I made the decision, well, I'm going to go find a counselor.
Yeah. Wow.
And I'm going to walk through and best decision of my life, man.
That's great.
So months of that, just super helpful. But I think we're afraid to ask because we're afraid of the answer sometimes. And man, that's scary. That's scary.
It is. But like you, I can't think of anyone in a church staff setting. Those were people, mentors outside of the church. And we need to normalize that, though.
Well, totally. I mean, totally. And again, I think that's the value of the network is over time, those network relationships become friendships, and those friendships become spaces for people to ask and lean in and kind of fight against the loneliness, fight against the temptations that you're facing and fighting, and the discouragement, all those things. They're life-giving, but it does take time.
There's a network that happens just north of Chattanooga. It's in Cleveland, Tennessee. And there's a guy who leads it. I just go and hang out when I can. It's not our network. And he actually just took a pastorate, but the guy who leads it, which I hate, bittersweet, but he really pastors the people, the youth pastors really well. But every month that they meet, he asks them a question about their hearts. And I've just loved watching him. And I mean, he was a full-time youth pastor and at his church, and just watching him care for their hearts. I mean, he would ask them every month something about their time with Jesus or what God was doing in their hearts. And I loved how that was a normal part of what they expected every month.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, listen, I want to be mindful of your time. I'm super thankful for you to be on here. Is there anything that comes to mind resource-wise as we're talking through this? Obviously, your network, if folks are in the area, they're in the Chattanooga, North Georgia area, easy place to plug in. Anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, if I can be a resource in any way, I mean, you can link to my email, and I love talking to youth pastors all across the country. If I can be a resource in any way, just two quick things. Youthworkers.net is the National Network of Youth Ministries. If you're looking for a network, they have links to networks all across the country. If you're looking for a network, and the other one is we do host a conference in August. We do it at the beginning of the school year. It's for volunteers, part-time, bivocational, full-time. We keep it low cost, and we try to do a high-quality conference for leaders. And as you're going into the school year, it's in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the best city in America, in my opinion.
Fastest internet.
Oh,
that is legitimately true.
We are called Gig City, and so it's a great town. But so you can go to youthleaderconference.com, and to see more about that.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll link to that as well in the show notes. And then make sure even if you're not in the Chattanooga area, I'm sure Zach's totally down to help and direct you and answer any questions you have. So, Zach, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it. I feel like it's been helpful. I've enjoyed it. Hopefully those listening have. I think we would both just say to you, if you're listening and you're struggling with loneliness, like, you're not alone in that loneliness. For sure, there's hope there. Just start with a coffee or lunch with another youth worker or volunteer or somebody. I have found that community doesn't often find me. I have to go find it. And so you can do it.
Good word.
Yeah. Cool. All right, man. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll connect beyond this real soon.
Thanks again, Jody. Always
Cool.
an encouragement to be with you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Great interview with Zach. Just so appreciate his heart for youth pastors, for encouraging and helping others, particularly around what he does with networking. So hopefully some really helpful things there. Don't forget to head over to the show notes page for links to all those things we mentioned. That's at thelongerhaul.com/episode 137. For that, make sure, again, you subscribe, follow the show wherever you are. Jump into the Facebook group over at the Facebook. And then, of course, jump on the mailing list at thelongerhaul.com. That'll do it for this episode. We will catch you in the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Longer Haul Youth Ministry Podcast. Before you go, hit that subscribe button to keep these conversations coming. For notes, resources, and to join our community, swing by thelongerhaul.com. Stay encouraged. Keep making a difference. And remember, we're in this for the longer haul. Catch you on the next episode.